Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
I make sense to myself. It's everyone else that confuses me.
This is Tourette's podcast. I'm Ben Brown. So I was at an event a couple weeks ago. It was something related to my day job. It was inside this television studio, had nothing to do with Tourette syndrome. It was just an event related to my career. But it was a live audience event, and I think it was even being streamed online as it was happening. And basically, what it was a panel of experts on stage talking about their expertise, and the audience is sitting there totally quietly to listen and learn and not interrupt. And there I was, sitting in the audience, forcing back my dominant vocal tic. Because a succession of these tics in this pin-drop quiet studio while experts are live on the air talking about important things would be just kind of, weird. And it got to the point where I wasn't really paying attention to the panel or whoever was talking. Instead, I was running through my head what I've gotten out of my conversations here on this podcast and how people have handled situations like these. And I think my default these days, and it certainly wasn't always this way, but I think my default resolution has come to be that I'm not ashamed of my TS, not like I used to be, and I definitely used to be. And now I'm not ashamed of my TS, and I'm going to tick loud and proud, and whoever has a problem with it probably just needs to hear all about TS from me, and then it's settled and we can all move on together. The tics of Tourette syndrome vindicated. But I also had to, I had to burp too, and I'm sorry if that grosses you out, but I did, and I was almost instinctively suppressing it because, of course, the thought process was, that's just something, and this is an automatic thought process. It's just, this is something that you don't do openly here. You don't burp in a public setting, not at a time like this, not at a place like this, sitting right next to my bosses and everyone else in their business suits. And you're maybe guessing where this is headed. I got conscious of the comparison. Two natural things to me, a burp and a tic, being suppressed for the convenience of all around me. And as I've learned in talking with you guys about how we're living with Tourette syndrome, the better answer is not letting the world shut you down, not letting anyone tell you to cover up your tics, and you not telling yourself to cover up your tics when they say nothing about your rank as a human being. You're fine. I should be able to tic openly without a second thought, no matter where I am, because it's only natural to me and, it isn't really going to hurt anybody else. So that's kind of the person I am now. And yeah, I didn't want to interrupt the program with odd noises, but again, I was running through all this, civil liberty stuff in my mind while sitting there suppressing, what was totally natural to me. And so, while a panelist was talking about the real qualities of modern corporate leadership, I took a quick look around me, saw all the engaged faces, squinted my eyes tightly, and slowly let out the longest, loudest, most powerful burp the world has ever heard. I'm just kidding. I would never do that. Actually, the need to do so just went away, as it does sometimes. But the urge to do this particular vocal tic was still persisting, of course. And I was fighting it mainly with annoying puffs of air from my mouth or vocal sounds that kind of fit with the occasion, like saying which is more kind of like a stable second cousin of this particular tic, this tic that was trying to well up in me, which sounds like this. And I got to thinking about CBIT, which a lot of you are familiar with. It stands for Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention for Tics. And disclaimer here, listen to this. Even though I was thinking about CBIT, and I'm going to go through that here, this is not a talk about CBIT, and please don't consider me an expert or a resource on that. I'm absolutely not. Though we do talk about CBIT in upcoming episodes, so when I mention CBIT here, don't quote me. This is just the story of my thought process while trying not to tic in front of a studio audience on a live occasion. Anyway, one of the very general talking points about CBIT is that it gets you thinking of ways to engage with competing behavior when you feel the urge coming on to tick, like sort of a supposed competing thought process to that tick. Well, back to me, sitting in this fairly intimate audience as people on stage are talking about important things, I'm thinking, perhaps in too literal of a way, of how I could do something or think of something that seems to complicate or run counter to this particular vocal tick. And reflecting on an upcoming episode that you'll get to hear this season, what this guest told me that she did, and she went through CBIT, she told me that if she felt a tick coming on, she would think about the opposite of that tick. Like if her tick was rolling her eyes up, she would roll her eyes down instead, or think about rolling her eyes down. And that would actually neutralize things to some degree. This is what she told me. So I tried to think of the opposite of this vocal sound, which I did aloud in that studio audience at a totally random time, coming out sounding like this. Almost like a Tim Allen on Home Improvement type thing, or something that just sounded odd, as odd as the tick I was trying to avoid. Again, that's not an example or portrayal of CBIT. It was just my unrehearsed, uninformed experiment with trying to influence my tics in situations where I don't want to tick, which led me back to my actual tick and the urge to do it. Thankfully, my brain settled with me to where I could do that tick somewhat quietly, not interrupting too much. And then, even more thankfully, my throat clearing tick took over and restored my semblance of normalcy. And yeah, throat clearing might get a little annoying too, but at least it sounds like throat clearing, something a little bit more normal. So that was my thought process, which brought me back to the whole thing about openly ticking and living life without the fear of being called out. And it made me realize I don't always have it. I don't always have that courage to do something pretty broadly perceived as weird or odd or whatever the word is. Sometimes I just don't want to deal with it, and I'll sink right back into the habit of masking tics if I feel like it's going to make the night go more conveniently. I know CBIT, for instance, and again, this is not a talk about CBIT, though we will get into that before long. I know that one of the tenets, you could say, of CBIT is to get away from voluntary suppression of tics and get to constructive ways of negotiating with your tics for better management, whatever makes you happy. The only point of this story was, even though I was diagnosed as a little kid, I'm still working with my TS and trying to learn more about it and be more practical with not only my knowledge, but also how I apply it. And I consistently hear from you guys going through the same thing in different ways. And for me, the process of being better and smarter and less isolated in this whole thing is to do these conversations with you guys on this podcast all around the world. Because I've just gotten so much from them, talking about how we handle, cumbersome or delicate situations. And as I sat in that studio with that audience, bubbling with the urge to tick, I thought of you guys and individual moments from this podcast, and just that alone calmed me down. Like when I said my tics kind of eased up. I think, they were happening and kind of bubbling up just from the stress of the situation. But thinking of this stuff, it calmed me down, and I never felt the urge to burp again. Okay, on this episode, number 1 of season 3, we have somebody familiar, and her name is Sophia. It's time to get to know her if you don't already. Sophia is the admin to the Tourette's podcast discussion group on Facebook, and is, of course, a Touretter herself, living in the UK, becoming a scientist, being an advocate, being lots of fun to talk to. This is a really great conversation. Real quick, check out episode 0 of this season as well. It came out at the same time as this episode today, Friday, March 22nd, 2019. That's episode 0. Has a lot more about what's ahead for the podcast. But definitely stick with this for now. Here's me talking with Sophia. So state your name and the part of the world you live in, and maybe just give us a few high points of your day-to-day.
Okay, I'm Sophia. I live in Hertfordshire in the UK. I'm 22 and I've just finished an MSc at university, and I have Tourette's. That's my connection to it. As well as having Tourette's, I'm also autistic and I have OCD.
And so what are you working on at the university? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I did an MSc in research methods in psychology. So I did my undergraduate degree in psychology and then went further and did a course that was specifically focused on research methods within psychology. I've always really enjoyed studying. For me, studying is something that I really like doing. I love learning. And And a lot of people have always said to me, "Oh, did you go into psychology to better understand yourself?"
Right.
And I'm like, no, not really. I went into psychology to try and figure everyone else out. I make sense to myself. It's everyone else that confuses me. So I've always been drawn to psychology.
Do you feel any closer to understanding other people yet?
No, not at all. Just as I get close and I think, okay, this is starting to make sense now. Someone goes and does something, and I think, no, that doesn't fit my pattern at all. So it hasn't quite been the how I thought it would be. But it's been really interesting. It's really nice to learn about different things, and I quite like research. Most of my research is related more to autism
Right.
than Tourette's or anything else. And I just, similar to Tourette's, actually, I think there's quite a negative description of autism. The way it's written about, it's not very positive. It's always seemed to be sort of disorder this and disorder that. And I think
Right.
we need to start realizing that actually it's not all bad.
Yeah. So, is that kind of a thing for you from an advocacy standpoint of just, we have what we have and we're kind of dealing with it in our own ways. We, don't necessarily need to be categorized as something that needs to be understood and fixed by other people in such a way that it really kind of sucks to kind of be the person in the room who that's people's take on you. Like, oh, I wish it could be better for that person,
Yeah,
that kind of thing. And
absolutely.
that's great. And I'm sure it's sincere, but it also comes from a point of misunderstanding.
Yes, definitely. I think it's important to remember that, yes, all these conditions come with their own challenges, but there isn't really necessarily a need to be trying to cure people or fix people or anything like this. For me, the best therapy I've had, so to speak, is other people's understanding. I
Yeah.
found that way more beneficial than any medication I've taken, any therapies I've had. For me, the thing that's made the most difference to my life is being able to meet other people who are like me and just feeling accepted. And I think if we can extend that to wider society, it would be nice to be able to feel the same when I'm not with people who have the same conditions as I do.
Do you remember being young and kind of coming into the realization that people may view you or consider you in a different way?
Yeah, so I've always felt different from quite early on. Tourette's for me didn't start until I was 16, so
Okay.
that was quite later on. But I've always struggled with sort of making friends and understanding social cues and things like that. So I've always known from quite early on that I'm not like everybody else,
Right.
which sometimes bothered me, sometimes didn't. I think other people made a bigger deal out of it than it was. And then that would make me think, okay, maybe there is something wrong with me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then once I was diagnosed and they said, oh, you're autistic, I thought, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's not necessarily bad, which is what I thought it was.
Yeah, that's important because sometimes, and I'll hear from people too, when the diagnosis comes, like say for example, it's Tourette syndrome, the diagnosis just landed, it's themselves or maybe one of their children, and there's a lot of sort of like, oh great, life's going to be an extreme challenge, and I mean, but walking into it from the outset of having a sense of perspective and education and informed perspective on it. I mean, if you had that, it had to make the transition a lot easier for you. And so the mission does become at that point, like, yeah, just kind of pick it up from there. That's just making sure other people understand that you got your challenges, but you're okay. I mean, they don't have to, it's an awkward thing.
Yeah. So I found my Tourette's diagnosis much harder to adapt to in the beginning. When I found out I was autistic, I'd always felt different and I'd always done things differently to other people. And being told that I was autistic was actually quite a relief because I finally had an answer for why I am the way I am.
Yeah, yeah.
But with the Tourette's, being 16, my tics sort of started quite suddenly overnight. So I went from being this very quiet person who liked to blend into the background and don't like attention and anything like that to just having these uncontrollable jerking movements, barking.
Yeah.
And I found that really difficult to adapt to. And even now, sometimes I find difficult being autistic and having Tourette's because being autistic, I like predictability, I like order, I like to
Yeah.
know everything that's going on. But Tourette's, as you know, is
Yeah.
completely unpredictable. So that was hard. Going back to school and having people be able to hear me coming up the corridor before they could see me, I just
Yeah.
found it really difficult to adjust to this new normal for me. So that took much longer to get to the point where I thought, okay, this is what I have. I never would talk about it. So I would get my teachers to explain to the class, but I wouldn't be in the room whilst they were
Yeah.
doing so. It was very much not something I was ready to confront, I guess.
Wow. Yeah. So you're the second person I've talked to in as many days to tell me the exact same story, that they had to wait outside the classroom while the teacher explained to everybody else what was happening with this student, and the student has Tourette syndrome, and try to be courteous, try to be polite, and that sort of thing, but also at the same time just flaring up this sensitivity about yourself, that all of a sudden
Yeah.
people are going to be staring at you when you walk back into the classroom. They're going to be looking for things, and it's
Yeah.
and what you were saying earlier, which was beautiful about just the understanding of other people having so much more benefit than any medication.
Yeah.
I mean that's something you're kind of always having to kind of angle toward, or at least kind of want in a situation. So if you're young and certain kids may not have the maturity level to be able to kind of deliver that for you.
Yeah.
Was medication part of the conversation at that time, kind of when it was a new thing and kind of difficult to cope with?
It was. I did try some medication when the tics were at their most severe, but I'd found the side effects just to be horrendous. And
Yeah.
it almost felt like choosing between having these tics that were just exhausting me or having medication that was causing other problems.
Yeah.
And neither of them really felt like a good solution. And it wasn't until about 2 years into my Tourette's journey that I met a group of adults with Tourette's. And
Okay.
that was the changing point for me. Up until that point, I couldn't understand how I was going to live my life with this thing. And then you go online and you Google things, and that's probably not something I should have done. I wish at the time somebody had put me in contact with somebody who has the condition,
Right.
rather than
Yeah.
me going online and reading things that are written by people in maybe the medical field, or written from a very, I don't know how to describe it, but a very sort of cold standpoint,
Yeah.
rather
I got
than
that.
hearing it from someone who's been there. And then when I went to a support group and I saw all these adults there that were driving, working, some of them had families, and they were just sort of getting on with their lives with this condition, a lot of my fears were alleviated by that.
Was the support group something you found in the course of Googling, or was it a flyer in the window, or how did you come to find this group?
Yeah, it was just this event that came up on Twitter at the time. It was the London Brain Project, and they were bringing together a group of people with Tourette's to sort of do a mashup of science and art. So there was different activities throughout the day.
Yeah.
And I said to my brother, there's this thing going on in London. I'm not very good at traveling outside of where I live. I get quite anxious about things like that.
Yeah.
And I said, do you think maybe we could go together? And he was like, yeah, definitely. I think that'd be really good for you.
Oh,
and we
awesome.
went, and it was strange for me to see someone else ticking.
Yeah,
I thought,
yeah.
that must be what I look like to other people. And it was a really important moment, I think, for me.
So were these people who were sort of peer aged, or what kind of walks of life? I mean, obviously you can relate to them from the Tourette standpoint, but how else did you identify with these people?
Yeah, so there was quite a mix of people. There was a couple of younger people, a couple of older people. We were all on different tables. There were some medical professionals there, some scientists, some artists, and it just became this sort of collaboration of discussing how Tourette's affects us and how we could show it through art and express how we feel and things like that. And it was interesting.
I mean, did that start kind of a recurring thing for you? Did you have scheduled meetings, or?
No, so that was a one-off event. And then I started looking out to see if there was a support group available, because having met everybody, I felt like that's something I wanted to do more often. And then maybe about a year or so later, again on my Twitter feed, somebody had set up the London Tourette support group.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to go down to a meeting there where I met, again, lots of adults with Tourette's, and I got to know the coordinators quite well. And not long after going there, I became their admin person, a bit like on the Tourette's podcast group.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I've managed their database and things. And from that, I've made some great friends that I'm in contact with really regularly. So I know that if I'm ever having a bad moment with Tourette's and I think I need to talk this through with someone, there's a number of people I could reach out to, which I'm really grateful for.
So have you come in contact with people who are sort of more circumstantially similar to you with autism, OCD, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so everybody I've met has got their sort of own combination of conditions.
Yeah.
A lot of us with OCD, ADHD being the other common one. But it's just really nice to be able to be in a room full of people and not have to say, oh, just to let you know, I've got this condition. It's really strange to just sit there and talk to people and not have to mention it, not be worried about it.
And so you had mentioned that, you came on to admin the Tourette's podcast discussion group, which I'm eternally grateful for. I mean, it's helped the podcast so much. It's helped the conversation around it. It's a good place to take, just pieces from the show to dissect or discuss or bring up entirely new things. And I've learned a lot from it. It's been really nice. I mean, what are your observations?
I think it's just really nice to see people feel free to ask any question. There's no judgment in the group.
Right.
People seem quite happy to reach out and ask for advice. I'm part of a lot of Tourette's groups on Facebook, and although I look at them and read other people's experiences and sometimes comment, I don't often post anything.
Yeah.
But with the Tourette's podcast group, because a lot of the members have also been on the podcast and you've heard their stories, it feels like a much closer sort of community. And people offering each other advice. And even most recently, where one of the group members had heard an episode of the podcast and said, I'd really like to reach out to this person, I've got a question.
Yeah.
And to be able to put them in touch. And
yeah.
I think it's just really great.
Just being able to interact with people and kind of get their takes on situations. And especially if somebody says something on an episode that really resonates with them and they're like, wait a minute, I do the exact same thing. I thought I was the only one in the world. But I mean... Yes,
like right in the beginning with the ear popping tick.
Yeah.
I remember listening to that very first episode and thinking, I can't believe he just said that he does an ear popping tick. I couldn't find anybody that did that. And then you mentioned it and how many people came forward to say they have that exact same tick.
Yeah. And simultaneous to that, a lot of people, including myself, were kind of worried that, are we injuring our ears by doing this? And then there was a listener who weighed in and said, I don't think you're injuring your ear. I think this is a trick that scuba divers try to do. And it's kind of a talent if you have it. And I had to put a disclaimer on that, I don't know whether or not that's true because I'm not a medical professional. But just being able to find perspective like that and answers like that has been, I don't know, it's just been a very bright point to the past couple of years here and or past year, I guess. And we have what? I mean, so it's 150 some members right now?
We're on 152.
That's cool. Oh, that's so cool.
So it's grown really quickly. And the podcast has definitely become my sort of resource that I signpost people to now. So in more recent years where I've become more comfortable with having Tourette's, I do talks now for parents and schools and things about the condition. I want to be able to help others the way I was helped when I most needed it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time people are like, oh, what resources are out there? What can I read? What can I look at? What can I go to for more information? And Tourette's podcast has definitely become a go-to resource because it's real stories from the perspective of people who have the condition. And I think that's really fundamentally what people need to hear.
Yeah.
Whether it be somebody who has the condition and needs to feel like they can relate to somebody, or a parent who's supporting a child, adults with Tourette's are the ones you could get the best advice from. I love the way everybody now on Twitter and stuff, if anybody with Tourette's has come up in the media or stuff, they're like, Ben, are you interviewing this person?
Yeah,
They're
yeah, yeah, yeah.
sending people your way. Oh, you should interview this guy, or you should interview this person. I think it's great. Yeah, I remember being told to set up a YouTube channel once, and I thought that's the worst idea ever. I would be redoing each video thousands of times to get it spot
Yeah.
on. Yeah, I don't think I can put myself through that. So I steer clear of that.
Yeah, that's the big challenge for doing this podcast is I'm kind of never done with it until I'm just kind of physically exhausted and I'm like, okay, it's done.
Yeah, it's
Um
like high
it,
level of perfectionism, isn't it?
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's like I'm never completely satisfied with it for that
Yep.
specific reason. There's always something I wish I had done differently or done better.
Yeah, I'm
But
like that in so many areas, even my work, just so critical.
yeah.
Um, and I end up sort of going through it and changing bits and changing bits. And then by the end, I hate what I've turned it into. I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
it was fine how it was, but it takes me to sort of totally destroy it to realize that actually it was okay. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
challenges.
The thing that I've had to do, and it has really, really helped me, and this kind of comes from my background of editing audio and recording music and doing multimedia projects, is I've totally had to just limit my options and,
Yep.
just make myself blind to all these special features that, um, work on edit a photo and just kind of add this and add that and add this and add that and spend the next 1,000
Yeah.
years on it. And if I just had maybe 3 things I was allowed to do to it, I could make a better product, more quickly. And that's something that I've totally had to implement. It has not always been easy.
Yeah, that sounds like quite a good strategy to be
Yeah.
honest. For me, it's having a deadline. So that's
Yeah,
why I think
yeah.
uni works for me. Like having the deadline, my supervisor says, right, I need this by this date, then I've got that sort of end point where
Mhm.
I know it has to be finished. If I don't
Yeah.
have a deadline, then well, it could go on for months,
Yeah, it's,
and it still wouldn't be perfect. So having a deadline but it has to be set by someone else, if that makes sense. I can't impose my own deadlines.
yeah.
If I do it myself, then I think, okay, well, one extra day won't be bad, and it just never really is a deadline. So
That's
yeah,
totally, totally, totally true. And that's so it's I guess it's called Parkinson's law, where it's, the work you do fills the time out that you're allotted to do it. And
yeah,
and it is a really good strategy because, if you have a limited amount of time to do something, you just kind of aim for the high points rather than kind of laboring over the small details that not many
exactly,
people are going to notice. And
exactly, yeah.
well, how did you come to give talks to parents? I mean, that's something that I would want to do, and I'm sure a number of listeners would want to do too.
So a few years back, I was part of Fixers Campaign, which is a charity that gives young people a voice to talk about something that they feel is important.
Yeah,
And I thought maybe if I start talking more about Tourette's, it will become easier for me to feel more comfortable with it.
yeah,
So I wrote into them and said that, I wanted to talk about Tourette's and the misconceptions and just highlight the condition. And I made a short broadcast for ITV News over here in
okay,
the UK, which was
yeah.
aired. And then from that, people had messaged me to share their stories, which was really great to hear.
Oh, that's so cool.
I started to meet some parents of children who had Tourette's. And then a couple of the parents work for a charity in my local area that supports parents and carers of children with autism, ADHD, and related conditions.
Hmm.
And a lot of those people have Tourette's too. And they asked if I'd be willing to talk to groups of parents about my experience. And they haven't got a Tourette's speaker. So
Yeah.
it all sort of started from there.
So these are parents of sort of newly diagnosed children or people who think they might have Tourette in the family, or
Yeah, so they might be newly diagnosed. They might suspect their child has Tourette's, and I just go in and I give a presentation on sort of the overview of Tourette's, so the fact stuff, what Tourette's is, and
Mhm.
what tics are, and I give examples. And then towards the end, I'll talk about my personal experience with Tourette's, what I found helped, what didn't help so much, and then finally leave it open for questions. And yeah.
And so, do you find that people are coming to it with what's the degree of understanding on their part coming in? And I know it's going to vary person to person, but and it's obviously amazing that they want to get accurate information from someone with lived experience. But
Yeah.
Do there seem to be misconceptions kind of driving some of their concerns, or?
Yeah. So a lot of the fairly typical misconceptions surrounding coprolalia and things,
Yeah.
which I always talk about, but in a way that I don't think it's right, that I try and explain that there seems to me anyway to be a bit of a divide in the Tourette's community of those who have coprolalia and those who don't.
Yeah.
And I try to explain how saying, oh, my child has Tourette's, but they don't have the swearing type, isn't really helping the situation.
Exactly.
Because yes, they don't currently have the swearing type. They might develop the swearing type, but regardless, there are people with this tic, and it's a tic just like any other tic. We really don't need to segregate the community.
Right.
We can explain that it doesn't occur as frequently in everybody, that there's a smaller percentage, but I don't think it's right to, have that divide. I think a lot of parents try to reassure other people by saying, oh, my child has Tourette's, but don't worry, they don't have that swearing kind.
Right.
And I'm not sure that sends the right message.
It doesn't.
So I try to offer my viewpoint on that. I myself, when I first developed Tourette's, would say, I've got Tourette's. No, I don't swear.
Yeah, me too.
As a way of sort of reassuring people that I wasn't going to swear at them. And then I developed some coprolalic tics, which I struggled to deal with. And I realized actually that's a pointless thing to say, because anyone can develop tics at any time. If you have Tourette's, they change so frequently. You never know what your next tic's going to be. So I think we should just recognize that, yes, it's a tic. Yes, it's involuntary. And that's it. It's just another tic.
And it kind of makes me wonder if it's okay for me to ask how your family kind of dealt with sort of waking up to what you were dealing with.
So I think my family have been much more, have probably coped with it better than I have. So not long ago, I developed a middle finger tic, and I didn't know what to do.
Right.
I was afraid of going out and putting my middle finger at somebody. So I resorted to taping my fingers together.
Huh. Okay.
And it took my mum to say, you shouldn't have to do that. I understand that you're anxious about it, but that's not the right thing to do.
Wow.
So they get it.
Well, that level of comfort and support is, I mean, that's sort of a game changer, I think, especially for young people who I've talked with through email, who say that their parents will discipline them or at least just tell them, like, just try to control your tics today, or, we're going out tonight, or we're going to church, or we're going to dinner, or whatever it is. And, just try to keep your tics in line, or maybe stay home or something like that. And
I'm very lucky not to have had anything like that. I mean, I've had friends at university where there's been days I've been so highly anxious about ticking and being worried that what if somebody says something, and what if somebody this, and what if somebody that. And they've just basically said that, look, if you tic and someone makes a comment, we are here. We will not let you have to explain it if you feel like you can't. We've got your back, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I've been lucky to be surrounded by people who are wholly accepting of whatever the situation may be. And eventually I untaped my fingers, because I think a lot of my talks are about, accepting the condition. And a lot of young people that I meet, I try to reassure them that they can go on and do anything they want to do in their lives.
Yeah.
And it kind of seems a little bit hypocritical to then feel so worried about this middle finger tic. So I braved it and took it all off. Waited for it to pass.
I love it. Kind of going back to what you were saying about not wanting to really stand out in a crowd anyway. And then you have Tourette's, which kind of makes that decision for you in a way. But were you ever sort of able to kind of, or did you ever even have any sort of interest in hiding that part and not explaining it when people asked? And, and that's all, the kind of thing you hear for fear of the stigma or being misunderstood or being kind of written off socially or that kind of thing. I mean, did you ever have any of those concerns or conversations with yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite a big suppressor, so I suppress my tics a lot. And
Yeah.
I find myself doing it even in situations or with people that I know I don't really need to do it with, because I know
Yeah.
that they're totally fine
Hmm.
with it. But I think for me, when the tics first started, they were so severe and they came in such quick succession. There was no
Hmm.
ability to suppress. I didn't even know suppression was a thing. Um,
Right.
and then as the tics started to wax and wane, and I sort of started to identify more of the sensations that I feel before a tic and things like that, I started sort of experimenting with suppressing and holding the tics in, which is not comfortable, as I'm sure you know quite well.
Yeah.
But I seem to have this possibly irrational fear now, where I think that if I don't suppress my tics, I might forget how to. And that
Oh,
feels
gotcha.
really me
Practice.
because I don't know
Yeah.
if you can cope with going back to how it was for me in the beginning. So I'm sure
Yeah.
that's not the case, but I do tend to suppress maybe more than I should.
What do you find yourself doing to suppress? Do you have any sort of rituals you do or thought processes or?
So mine is sort of just really holding it in. So I'll notice
Yeah.
after a while that I'm super tense because I'm squeezing every muscle just to keep it in. Um,
Right.
or I'll sort of disguise them. So I had this really sort of big arm jerking tic where I'd throw my arm out and shake it. So I put
Yeah.
like 5 bracelets on my arm so that people thought I was just adjusting my bracelets.
Huh.
So
Okay.
it's almost a combination
Yeah.
of either holding it in or trying to disguise it so that it looks just like a regular movement.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I would do. I would do something that looked normal on top of this thing that didn't look normal,
Yeah.
just in the hopes that it would be more easily dismissed to someone who saw it and thought it might have been kind of strange.
Yeah. So
And
like
it's
I'll
like, oh,
jerk
he
my
was
neck
just
and then
coughing or,
maybe rub the back just so it looks like I was just moving my head.
yeah, just adjusting or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever have occasions like that where people who, just strangers observe you and ask you or take note of you? And I mean, have you had any awkward situations like that?
My one and only awkward situation was not long ago at university where I was sitting in a lecture and I wasn't having a particularly good day and I wasn't suppressing very well. So
Hmm.
the noises were coming, the whistling, all the vocal
Yeah.
tics. And the lecturer turned around and made a comment about the noise. And I thought, oh no, that's me. So I
Right.
got up and left because I knew I was going to do the noises again and I just didn't know how to navigate the situation. So I left the class and then during the break, I went and found the teacher and I said, oh, so I'm really sorry. You mentioned the noise. I said, that's me. I have Tourette's. And he was very apologetic and
Yeah.
he felt bad about it because it's written in my sort of study needs agreement type thing that we have at university.
Yeah. Okay.
But my mum was strangely quite pleased that it happened because I would never normally have done that. I would not have gone up to someone and said, I have Tourette's. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
ever
Yeah.
felt confident enough to do that. So she was really pleased and she saw it as actually a sign of progress that a situation came up and I dealt with it.
So that's interesting. I mean, it ended up being just kind of like a real live drill in a way, or like a life trial that you handled well, just because. And I mean, it has to be because of that level of support you've had in your past, and
Yeah,
just
definitely.
that feeling in the back of your mind that people have your back. You can explain yourself, and you're not going to be alone in the world when you do that. Even if this person doesn't understand you, you still have that reinforcement in your
Yeah.
past.
So my original plan was to go and find one of my other teachers who knows me and explain to her what had happened and ask her to come and help me. But having spent
Hmm.
like 10, 15 minutes looking for her, I couldn't find her. And I thought, okay, my choices now are I either have to go and explain this, or I'm not going to be able to go back to the classroom.
Right.
And to me, it seemed like explaining it was the right thing to do. I didn't want to miss out on the whole day of lectures. I wasn't going to risk going back in and carry on making noises for there to be further comments. So, when you sort of do something and then you think about it afterwards, and I was kind of pleased that I didn't have too long to think about it, because I may have talked myself out of it. I knew I had a limited period of time because they were on a break. The break between a lecture isn't going to last forever. So it was sort of, if I don't do it now, I won't do it. So, yeah.
Oh, I love it. And so I'm kind of wondering about when you said that, travel would kind of be an anxious kind of thing, or, not necessarily being comfortable with, having to travel long distances. Is it because of that in a way, maybe being identified, or is it just the clamor that comes with travel? I mean, I think that's it with me. I mean, I worry in airports that someone might, report me or observe me. And I do find myself suppressing my tics if I'm in an airport or on an airplane.
Yeah.
Or at least definitely trying to disguise my tics. But, what about it bothers you? So
it's a bit of both with the travel. I don't travel anywhere on my own. I get quite anxious if there's a lot of people, a lot of crowds. Some of that is just down to finding the whole situation too overwhelming. The sensory aspect of just crowds of people and noise, and it's not very pleasant for me. And then some of that is down to some tics, where I worry, if I tick this, what if I tick that? What if someone says something? How will I cope with it? There's been a few occasions where I felt like my tics were causing a problem.
Yeah.
But I think maybe it's more because I'm hyper aware of it than it actually causing a problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll be in a lecture, and if I'm struggling to suppress and I'm ticking, I think I'm being a huge distraction to everybody else. And really, my friends, we don't even notice anymore. It's just you. The only time they ever really notice is if a new tic comes along, and they're like, "Oh, that's new." So I think I'm just more self-conscious of it than I need to be, because other people really don't seem to care that much.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is for me. I think I kind of overthink the value that somebody else is going to put on seeing me tic. And, if it is a funny thing for them or whatever, and they don't get it, and that, it's just something like that one quirk from their day that they end up talking about with somebody else, I guess, so what? I wish I wish understanding, was the bottom line. But I think the sort of anxiety that I will feel about being noticed, even though it bothers me way less now than it used to, still the anxiety is enough to almost perpetuate the issue and cause tics to kind of flare up, because I'm thinking about them more, and it just it ends up being kind of cyclical in that way. It's kind of weird.
Yes, exactly. I get stuck in that cycle all the time. So I'll get anxious about something or tics, then I'll tic more. And then the fact that I'm ticking more makes me more anxious. And then it just goes round and round. And you think, I need to break this cycle somehow. And usually I break the cycle after I've spoken to someone else with Tourette's. I find that helps me. So last night, me and my brother went to a comedy show. It was a relaxed performance. There was various comedians with different disabilities, and a whole group of us adults who have Tourette's, who are in contact with each other, decided that we'd all go, so that we could meet up too. It just seemed like the perfect opportunity to catch up and see a show. There must have been about 14 people with Tourette's at this comedy night. One of the artists herself, she had Tourette's, Jess Tom, Tourette's hero. She did a
Tourette's hero,
And there was an audience, people with various conditions, and I was looking to see how other people would react to us being there. And really, it was no problem at all. I mean, Jess said she's got Tourette's. She said, you'll hear that there's a lot of us ticking off each other over here.
Yeah.
And people would look over occasionally, but it really wasn't a big deal. It was just a group of people out to watch a show.
And just for listeners' sake, when you say relaxed performance, that's something that's sort of intentionally considerate of people who might have, sensory considerations, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so relaxed performance is over here. You can get up, you can move about if you need to, you can tick, you can make noise. There's usually like a designated chill out space. So if you're finding it a bit too much, you can just go into this room where it's all sensory equipment. And it's basically just what I think performances should be, just people being able to feel relaxed.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody likes going to a show and feeling, I don't know, like
stressed out about
the whole point of going
about
to
what they're experiencing
is to enjoy it. And for some people, it's not that easy to sit in rows and watch a show in complete silence. So should they miss out because of that? I don't think that's quite right.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I love comedy and I've been to a zillion live stand-up shows. None have been like that. They've all just been just kind of like a general admission, just go to a comedy club, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I've always been horrified and terrified of it happening to me too when the comedian singles out somebody from the audience for interplay. And it's usually, it's just often it's kind of harmless stuff. Sometimes it crosses lines, but even if it doesn't, I've always been horrified of being that person in the audience who all of a sudden is part of the show and has to not come off like a total failure,
Yeah, so you would have loved
to the
last
audience
night.
Around you.
The show was called Comedy Without Victims, and right at the very beginning, the first thing that was said to us was, this comedy show will not involve audience members being picked on. So no need to worry about that. Because that's something that would put me off going to see comedy shows as well. I wouldn't like the idea of being sat there and somebody decides that I'm going to become the end of their joke. Right.
Yeah. I've seen people leave, I've totally seen that where audience members, who are getting picked on get fumed and they get up and leave and, they paid the ticket and that was their night. That kind of, I always have this terror. I'm terrified of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So your work, your university work, how far along with you are you with that? And sort of what are your goals?
So I've not long finished the master's and I hope to be able to do a PhD at some point in the future.
Yeah.
That would be the ideal scenario for me.
And applying that to the real world, what do you see yourself doing? Is there kind of like an angle to it that aligns with any certain, kind of cause or curiosity or, how do you see yourself kind of applying this?
So I'd love to continue within autism research and making it more autistic led, if that makes sense. Bringing together autistic people and allowing us to lead the way in what we think is important to us and for our lives. I mean, we don't like reading things that suggest we need to be cured and all these things. So
right.
I think if we spent more time listening to people who have the condition that we're reading about or talking about, we would come a lot further in our understanding rather than just assuming that we know what it must be like having had no experience of it. And I think we just need to be having more conversations about lots of things. And I find it sometimes a little bit frustrating where everybody in their respective communities, whether it's autism, Tourette's, OCD, there's a lot of people out there doing a lot of work and really campaigning to raise awareness, make a difference and educate people. And then a celebrity will come along and make a comment to their millions of followers. And it just feels like we're just going backwards again. So it's really hard to, I don't know, I think change is happening, but it's happening very slowly.
Yeah.
So there's still a long way to go. I think there'll always be a long way to go, but as long as we stick together, my motto is from struggle comes strength. So if we keep going, hopefully we'll make a difference. If not to ourselves, then maybe to someone else. One of my reasons for talking about Tourette's in schools and to parents and carers was that when I first started ticking, my school didn't have anybody else previously with Tourette's. It was very new to them. It was very new to me. It was a lot of figuring out for everyone, and it didn't always go very well. So if I'm able to, in my position now, offer information to other people to prevent a young person having to go through what I did in order to be understood, then I'll be happy with that.
For anyone listening who is a parent of someone newly diagnosed or someone who seems to be exhibiting symptoms, whether or not a diagnosis is there, or someone who's diagnosed themselves or has Tourette's or autism or OCD or another comorbidity themselves and is having some issues with it socially, or, is there a common thing that you tell people when you discuss this with them, just in terms of being able to kind of integrate it and feel better about it?
Yeah, so my advice is always, if you can, reach out to somebody in the community, meet people who have the conditions that you have, talk to people who have been there, and parents will realize, I think a lot of parents get quite anxious about what the future holds for their children. And I think they'll realize quite quickly, meeting other people, that their child will find their way. They've got their strengths, they've got their weaknesses, like we all do. Just be there, support them, and they'll figure it out.
Thanks for listening. Thanks so much to Sophia, not just for her time here, but her help with the discussion group on Facebook, Tourette's Podcast Discussion Group. Please join up. You can talk about episodes or particular moments or quotes or really anything, as long as it has to do with TS. Really great resource in the Tourette's Podcast Discussion Group. Do Sophia the favor and please answer the questions that you're presented when you ask to join the group. It is a closed discussion group, so you request access, and you do so by way of 3 easy questions where you tell us why you're interested, and then we review your answers and we approve you. And really, that's only to keep the discussion group a place, a valuable place for meaningful people, and not clog it up with bots or fake accounts or antagonists. And we've been successful with that. It's awesome, it's fun, it's enlightening, and a lot of good info gets exchanged there. Join up, Tourette's Podcast Discussion Group on Facebook. My email address is tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Send anything you want to send there, questions, answers to questions, comments about episodes, suggestions, or even just to say hello. I read everything that comes in, and I do my best to reply as quickly as I can. @Tourette'sPod is the handle on Twitter. I'm also going to read tweets that you'd like me to read on the show. Just use the hashtag Tourette'sPod so I know. And we'll pick back up next week with a new conversation and whatever you guys had to say about this one. Thanks for listening. This is Ben Brown.